real problem nowadays is if we want to begin to get back any business, I think we have to pivot and we have to find a way that we are going to be able to move very rapidly from predicting rain to building arcs. It's the best way I can talk about it. So we have to begin to look at some ways that we can get tourism to begin to come back sooner rather than later. And you know, we love to talk about diversifying our economy as if it's a very easy thing to do. Well, the reason that we haven't diversified our economies up to now is because it's a very difficult thing to do. And tourism, quite frankly, contributes such a substantial proportion of our GDP and our economy that whenever you start talking about tourism diversification, we have to talk about tourism and, not tourism or, because if you don't talk about tourism and, we're running ourselves back into the same kinds of problems. So if we begin to pivot and begin to look at some ways for us to begin to get our economies open again to tourism, there's some fundamental things that we have to do. And everything I'm about to say is already well underway. This is not speculation. The first thing is that we need to figure out a way we're going to create some kind of COVID-free corridors, meaning COVID-free corridors for people leaving their point of departure to come into the Caribbean and arriving at what I'm describing as a COVID-free community where they can commingle and coexist with service providers and the people who arrive. Now, what is critically important in all of this, and for them obviously to return along the same path, what is critically important is to find some way to get some rapid results testing, because that's the only way we're going to be able to do that. And in order to get there, what we have done is began talking to some world-renowned schools of public health, and they already indicated they're quite eager and interested in helping us with this, and working, for example, with CARPA in the Caribbean to make sure that we have these COVID-free corridors and COVID-free communities to begin to provide some kind of services to those people who are prepared to begin to travel back in the Caribbean, because it's so substantially a part of our economy. I mean, I heard a Minister of Finance a few days ago say something that I think that's all I needed to know about what's going on, saying that in the month of March, which is generally the peak month for collection of revenue in our region and tourism, his revenue was down by 70%. That's all I need to know. And if that is the case, we need to find some ways to begin to get ourselves back in order. So the idea being, and this must be done on a regional basis, because we cannot have individual countries competing with one another with differing sets of protocols in terms of what it is that's going to define somebody to allow them to come without any worry into the region, and to have workers in our region who are participating without any worry that they're going to be contaminated by somebody. So we are beginning to put those protocols in place to get people to begin to understand that we're not going to one day and magically wake up and find that things are COVID-free in the short term. At least that's what everybody is saying. So in the meantime, we must find some ways for us to begin to do this. And what I just described is something that's very much and very well underway. And we're working, by the way, with airlines, with cruise lines, with tour operators, travel agents, ground transportation companies, et cetera, et cetera. So everybody is involved in the conversation to see how we can begin to return our economies to some semblance of normalcy, even though we know it's going to take a while before we get back to full normalcy again. So that's very much where we are.
Thank you, Vincent. Some good news there for us. Zulfikar, I want to come to you next. You know, coming out of Guyana, where the dependency is very different from tourism, it's very much on the extractive sector, and, you know, just a couple of months ago, and I still think there's a lot of hope in Guyana based on the burgeoning energy sector. So give us a sense of what this new normal is looking like for Guyana. What do you think we can expect in the next couple of months?
Thank you, Golda, and good day to my colleagues, and thank you for having me on the program. Let me put this into perspective, one on a macro perspective, and one on a private sector perspective. In both scenarios, whether there is a new normal, yes, I think there will be a new normal. I don't think we will be able to go back to what we are accustomed to. The private sector, for example, we are now seeing, especially in Guyana, businesses that have to adapt to technological change in order to survive and remain open and remain relevant during this COVID crisis. So businesses are being forced now to adapt to technology, to have their workers and their employees do work from home rather than being at the office. And we're seeing those businesses that cannot adapt to those changes. They're doing terribly. They have to fire their employees. They have to let them go. So I think coming out of this COVID crisis, you will find that the companies that are standing up, the SMEs that are standing up, are the ones who were able to adapt to what is going on right now. The supermarkets that are in a position to deliver their services to people's homes. Those are the ones that I believe that will be the new normal that we are entering into. So the adoption of technology will be what we will now have to get ourselves acquainted with. On a national level, the new normal absolutely will not be the same. The region itself, the projections for 2020, it was positive. Small growth rates, with the exception of Guyana, of course. We were projected to have growth rates around 86%, according to the IMF, and that is due because of the oil reserve. With COVID, that has now dropped by half. It's about 42%. And you have Suriname, who's gone from a modest 1.5% or 2% now to minus 5.6% growth rate. You have Trinidad and Tobago, positive 2.5%. That may certainly hit the negative as well. So you're looking at economies in the Caribbean that will have to pick themselves out from this. And we cannot get away from what has to be done in order to get past this COVID crisis. People have to stay at home. We can't do what we are accustomed doing. The tourists will not be returning to the Caribbean anytime soon until all of this is settled. Like in countries like Guyana and Suriname, high dependence on oil and high dependence on the gold. Maybe gold may retain its earnings, but definitely what we projected for oil will not be there. So we have to take all of these things into consideration, and I would say that it would not be business as usual within the next year or two.
Thank you all. And we have quite a large audience of people from across the region who are already sending us their questions. And it's, very heartening to see that it's a very widespread. So we have people messaging us in Belize and Bahamas and in Suriname and in Guyana as well. And we want to get to those questions, but I want to quickly just ask you, from your perspective, have you in the last 6 weeks seen that some businesses, some sectors have been able to pivot and have been more agile than others in changing their offering and the way that they operate? If you could identify what those sectors are and what lessons we can all learn from them. Alison.
Sure. We've seen, Jamaica has a very diverse economy. We don't usually admit to it, but we do. We've seen with the farmers some concern where with the tourism sector closing, we've seen excess fruit. So in terms of pivoting, we've seen some farmers be able to get that fruit to various parts of the island, open it up. We've seen other farmers who've left them to rot. So in terms of a sector, I could see where, taking Jamaica as an example, if we get our act together, we could be doing better distribution of the farmland that we have, and we should be exporting it to our other Caribbean neighbors so that, we could be getting rice from Guyana, we could be getting different vegetables and fruits from Jamaica. So in terms of what I see can pivot, I've seen certain persons in certain sectors. I've seen, for example, the online with delivery services, people who normally deliver mail, delivering groceries. You could also see other people coming into the sector who are not normally in the cleaning business, because there's going to be a lot of deep cleaning that is needed. People looking to diversify what it is they currently do quickly to see if they can change. People who are using their alcohol for cleaning purposes instead of for drinking. So we've seen that pivot. I've also seen, shockingly, school. I've seen a new online school pop up in Jamaica where they're, we all have kids or grandkids, or we're godparents. Having the kids at home, and some schools can't do more than 2 hours per day because their teachers also have children to look after. So I've seen, for example, persons who have been able to take advantage in the sector online. Real estate, Jamaica had a lot of Airbnb. I'm sure the rest of the Caribbean, your real estate was doing well. I've seen people going online and still showing. It'll be interesting to see how the legal profession, even the accounting profession, pivot. Some of us are doing more at home. A lot more of us realize you don't need to be staring and smelling your client's perfume to be able to work and do accounting. But at the same breath, I do see opportunities where instead of just doing your regular business, now is the time to get out there and pivot into the delivery services, doing online training, which is very, very needed. Cash management right now. If you are in the business of helping people with how to manage cash, that would be needed because most people don't have the financial literacy that we really, really, really need. Right now, cash is king. So just giving you some sectors that I see. So what I would want to see opportunities in is much better use of our agricultural lands, much better use of technology and innovation. In the Caribbean, we have the brightest minds. We need to use them now and not use this time to wait and see what comes out of North America or Europe. We need to look at our own innovations to see what can we do better. Could we produce some of the, the face mask? Could we retool and use our 3D printing to do things that are needed now?
Yeah.
Thanks, Alison. Vincent, I see you smiling.
Yeah, no, because I so many of them resonate with me. I see people who are beginning to, their delivery services, same story, that all of a sudden were sitting dormant, and suddenly now there are all kinds of delivery services. There are restaurants who wouldn't dream of focusing on takeout services and delivery services are now suddenly doing that and have a special section that has been created within a matter of a week and out there advertising and promoting it in ways that they never did before. Education and training, same story. I mean, I have people calling me up and telling me they found this wonderful online program that they can go begin and to learn everything from programming themselves that before now they never dreamt of it. So being at home, suddenly people finding ways to educate themselves and grow. And then of course with school systems, being able to, there are some school systems that were way ahead of some of the others in terms of being able to deliver online education. And that seems to be having some traction. And the reason I was smiling is because I've never seen so much talent expressed musically as in the last week. People are constantly creating new music, new ways of collaborating. There are people producing cover songs of popular songs with groups in different places working together. So suddenly this idea of collaboration has been much, much broader. And then exactly what we're doing now. I have been on more webinars in the last 3 weeks than I have been on in the last 3 years. And so you're sitting there talking to somebody in Jamaica and somebody in Guyana and the person in the Bahamas, somebody all at the same time in ways that we never did before. So I think some of this stuff is going to be permanent. And then one other thing which I find to be very important is government delivering a lot more services online. There is a habit, particularly in smaller communities, people get in their cars and drive and go line up to do all kinds of things they could very easily have done online. They're saving congestion, they're saving aggravation, they're saving fuel. So I see a number of changes going on that I think are all going to be for the good once we get beyond COVID-19.
Thank you, Zulfikar. Is there anything that you wanted to add on that? Opportunities that have arisen and what sectors or business communities you've seen be able to pivot to take advantage of these new opportunities?
Golda, I agree with my colleagues. In Guyana, I've seen farmers now delivering their produce to people's homes. That is something that, it was unheard of just a couple of weeks ago. Supermarkets, as I've mentioned earlier, they're collecting people's shopping lists via WhatsApp. And you could either pass and collect it or they will drop it by your home. So it's the use of technology as well as delivering services, which is something that we have not been accustomed to in the Caribbean. I have seen manufacturing companies, they're now adhering to the COVID policies, spacing the staff out. They've cut down on the number of staff needed, but they have also introduced shift systems so that they could still keep the production going and meet the demand that is there. Online university. classes are still going on at the University of Guyana and many other universities. People can now do their work, have their classes at the comfort of their home or in their office, whichever way they see fit based on where they are. One of the things, though, that I think it's lagging behind is the government services. I think the payment of electricity bill, water, etc., those need to now be done via online applications. And everyone in the public services is paid through via the banking system. So they have their debit cards. Many people in the private sector have debit and credit cards. So I think the government services need to adapt to that now so that people from the comfort of their homes can pay those utility bills.
Thank you. So there are many questions that are coming in from our viewing audience online, and a lot of them have to do with diversifying away from tourism dependency. So Zara is asking, in diversifying the tourism product, are there particular types of tourism, in brackets, village-based tourism, for example, as opposed to cruise tourism, which would be recommended for countries to develop to build a more sustainable industry? How can the digital marketing tools be leveraged to respond to this, both during and post-crisis? Vincent, I'm going to hand that one to you.
Well, it's an excellent question, because I was, just to give an example of the Bahamas, between the Bahamas independence and today, there's been more than 100 million visitors to the Bahamas. Now, if we captured all of that information on these visitors and their characteristics, their likes and dislikes, we would be in a far better position to begin to identify those targets, to go back to the first part of the question, that are likely to be the very best. And the other thing that I find that we never paid enough attention to is really people from our diaspora. People who are living elsewhere, who are associated and connected to our communities, to invite them to come back, because they are likely to be the kind of people not only to come back into our communities once they understand and know that we have the all clear, but also to go back home and talk it up and brag. They are our best producing people. So when we start talking about diversifying, I mean, I agree with the question. We have to diversify within the tourism sector. Again, using the example from the Bahamas, we have this situation where 80% of our tourism and 70% of our population is on 2% of our land called Nassau and Paradise Island. So we have all these islands. And one of the things that the government just began to do here in the Bahamas, even before COVID, is having pre-clearance for people in Florida to fly direct to some of these other islands that are underdeveloped, instead of having to come through Nassau and increasing the length of the trip and increasing the cost of the trip. So people are beginning to find some very innovative ways to begin to focus on expanding and diversifying the tourism sector by way of experiences, by way of destinations, by way of just broadening the base. And so many places where you see people talking about over-tourism, what they really should be doing is expanding tourism to some of these other community areas which have new products and new attractions in order for people to participate in.
For Jamaica, one of the things I do note, our creative industry is very tied, land of reggae. We have people travel here for tourist purposes to see where Bob Marley was born, to dance. I think it's an opportunity to put those online, because you don't have to, while we are, there's a certain smell and taste and et cetera. But while we wait it out, I think it's an opportunity for our creative industry, as Vincent said, with music, but also with our dancing, with going online and making sure. Now, being online assumes you have Wi-Fi. So I think it's time our government start to look at perhaps realizing that Wi-Fi is a public good, and so it should be available to everybody, because one of the ways that as a Caribbean we improve ourselves are through education and through knowledge. And if we could get the Wi-Fi right across to the small areas, the mountainous areas, the rural areas, the small islands in the Bahamas and the interior, you will find that we have more education, more access to information, and we can get some of these areas out there so that when COVID is gone, whether you have a passport with COVID or for whatever reason, you now want to see and touch and feel those spaces that you didn't see before. I also think we need to do more Caribbean and local tourism. We sometimes look at America, we look at Europe. I've never been to I've never been to Guyana. I think it's time we also start to look within ourselves, to start to look and understand more of our own cultures, because we're very diverse and we're very beautiful and we're very interesting. I think if we, as islands in the Caribbean, start to look to see how we get our own tourism going amongst each other, you'd be amazed at things that we can do.
You know, just to reinforce what Allison just said, the largest single untapped source of business for Caribbean tourism is the Caribbean itself. If we were to begin to tap into the possibilities for tourism for within the region, we would be much farther ahead. We have a huge impediment to that, which we need to begin to fix, because it's a great opportunity for us to do this. And then to go back to your original point, there is a reason that when the internet first started, it was called the information superhighway. The same way we are building roads, this has to be done in exactly the same fashion, because one of the truths that we haven't said, and maybe start talking about some of the things that are happening, there are the kids who have access to online education is not even. And we have an obligation to begin to provide much broader access to those kids, so that they're not separated by wealth. That's a very important item to fix.
Indeed. We just want to let those of you who are participating in our chat that's really going off right now, we just posted about our quarterly bulletin, which is a special edition of the quarterly bulletin. It's called Caribbean Economies in the Time of Coronavirus. For those of you who want a deeper analysis of the economic impact on the region thus far and some policy options moving forward, you can take a look at that document as we're sitting here chatting together. But Alison, I just want to spin off of something that you just said. You know, maybe it's time for Wi-Fi to be thought of as a public good, provided as a public good. And we have Rudolph, who is asking, what is your advice for governments in the region to not only recover, but also to innovate forward to ensure we build the preemptive capacity while we out fires?
I think first is a tax. You know, Jamaica started some of that. So I talk about Jamaica because that's what I know. We have a lot of online services that we've been doing. I say we because I'm also with the Institute of Chartered Accountants, and we try to help and not attack the tax system, whether we like it or not. So one of the things that I think each government needs to look at to see how can you pay, whether it's your motor vehicle insurance, your property taxes, you know, what it is that you can go online instead of lining up, just whatever you can pay in a bank, should be able to pay to the government. In terms of making kiosks available, making it such that you don't have to just go to the tax authorities. And we also need to educate our people, because some of us, if we don't feel the money and we don't see them stamp our document to see our taxes have been paid, we don't believe that it is going to be reflected. So we need to have the government stepping forward and doing a lot more online training, a lot more access. And people will say, but rural people don't have computers, they have phones. We need to make sure that when whatever systems our governments put in place, they're accessible. You should be able to pay using that phone that you're using to communicate on WhatsApp to find out all the jokes for COVID. So I think it's an opportune time that the government should be tapping in and looking at what is happening with COVID, the jokes, the various online platforms that are springing up, and you use that to provide services as well. So it's not just taxing, but tax is what you use to pay, to also be more efficient. It's time for us to have efficient governments, because sometimes when you have so many people, you don't get the services you really need. And if you start to innovate from the government, it'll force the rest of us to get with it. So, UE, I think, did a really good job yesterday of doing doing a seminar using Zoom and using various platforms. You get into security because you hear about Zoom bombing. It's time for us to have a Caribbean version of that. Why can't we get one of our brilliant minds to come up with a Caribbean version of Zoom? It's time for us to put our money. Governments need to invest in research and development. What makes us different? What makes us better is our ability to innovate and adapt. So, I sound like I'm preaching, but I am looking to see what I could do from even an accounting or a tax. How do I provide my services in a much more efficient and cheaper way, by not having to travel, not having to, so if we can get our tax system, our services, all of that much more accessible and online, you will see that we have cheaper taxes. Well, I hope.
Thanks, Alison. And just to say that this is an area in which the Caribbean Country Department of the IDB has been doing a lot of work. And there is a study that was recently published. It's called Wait No More, and we'll post the link to that as well. And it explores the problems in the region when it comes to government services that aren't digitized and what some possible solutions to those problems could be. So we'll be posting that in our chat as well and following up on that. But I want to go back to the questions that we have from our viewers, our participants. And Alana is asking, for persons who are in the process of starting a business, how would this affect their overall strategy, especially investor engagement? Would investors be hesitant to jump on board? And if so, what would be a good approach to engage their interest at this time? Zulfikar, I'm going to give that one to you. What do you think?
Sure, thank you. And I think it fits in line with a comment I would like to make before I answer. I did invite Alison when I met her in Miami to come to Guyana, so you have no excuse not to come to Guyana. And I would like to say that I would like to see more attention being paid towards investment within our region, from among the region. So there's absolutely no reason why Alison and her firm cannot come and set up an office here in Guyana, which is needed right now, right? We have people from all around the world, from the US, from Canada, from Europe. They're flooding into Guyana, setting up offices, setting up accounting firms, auditing firms, firms to supply the oil and gas sector and every other sector. There is absolutely no reason why the rest of the Caribbean cannot take advantage of that and do that as well. With regards to starting up a business and investor engagement, this will be a very peculiar time because of the challenges that our governments will face within the region. We will have decline in revenues. We would not be able to collect the amount of taxes that we would have envisaged to have collected at the end of this year. Our sectors, tourism, oil, all of them are not going to bring in the revenues that we expected. But nevertheless, we have to adapt to that, and we have to encourage, after this is all over, find incentives and find ways and means of getting people who would like to invest, getting people, especially the SMEs, help them, hold their hands, and encourage them to come and invest. And start up businesses. So whether it is waivers, tax waivers, maybe deferral of national insurance contribution, whatever it takes, maybe waiver of we have VAT certificates, you have to pay for that, TIN certificates, you have to pay for that, maybe waiver of those things so that small businesses, investors who would like to set up companies, they can have a start. Look at credit facilities, low interest rate, so that we can generate back employment, generate back production into these sectors. And I think those are some of the policies that our governments will have to be innovative, and they will need the support of financial institutions like the IDB, for example, and the World Bank to support that initiative. Where we're heading now, it's not going to take the governments alone to do this. It has to take government, private sector, civil society, and our international partners all working from one strategy to get this done. And if we do this correct, there is no turning back for the Caribbean.
Thank you, Zulfikar. Yes, sure.
From an accounting perspective regarding the investors are worried about risk. So if you are starting up a business and your investors are looking at you, they may get a little skittish. However, if you go to them with a plan and you show them how you're going to use their money, if you show the cash management that you're going to do, how you're going to work through this period and what you're going to do, because remember, you have to be agile right now. Every business needs to be relooking at their cash, collect as much as you can, looking to see what strategy you're using. We can't predict when we're going to be out of the COVID crisis, but you can predict your behavior. So if you are starting up and you have investors, you need to stick close to them. They need to understand that, yes, it's risky times, but they need to see that your business is planning and that you have good cash management. And if you're a business and you don't know how to manage cash, lots of online. I'm part of Junior Achievement. The other thing that we need to remember when you're dealing with small businesses, get your kids involved. Now is the time to teach your children how to manage the money, because they will be spending it all if you're not careful. So a lot of us are spending more time with our kids. I don't think it should be something we hide. So go online, get some cash management courses, and use that to help you to ensure your investors don't feel that they're at major risk. I would be worried if I'm putting my money into a business that I don't see them communicating with me, I don't see them telling me what they're doing, I don't see them managing money or planning and telling me how they're going to mitigate and how they're going to innovate. So just answering in terms of an accounting perspective, you don't have to have an accounting degree to understand cash. From the age that a child has sense, we should also use this time as businesses to relook at our strategy, relook at our cash management.
Just if I might, one of the things that I'm always reminded of is, and going back to something Zulfikar said earlier, and also Alison just amplified, we continued the navel gaze in our region. People who look at whatever country they live in and they think that's the universe. But this notion of us working across the region, in the last 7 years, I have worked in more different places in this region than I think I ever thought I would. The idea of beginning to take your business on the road is something that seems to be foreign. And I'm not quite sure exactly what it takes to fix that. But the same way I say that the biggest untapped market for tourism in the Caribbean is the Caribbean itself, it's the same thing for business. The biggest untapped market for business is the Caribbean itself, for us to begin to walk around. And then the other thing, and I see a number of the questions really relating to this coming in, the Caribbean, as I said at the very beginning, is the most tourism-dependent region in the world. Why in the world are we not also the most tourism-competent? Why are we not selling our tourism services to everybody else around the world? Because we know it better than anybody else and we can deliver services. So this idea, we focus on serving people who come into the region only instead of just simply selling our services to people around the world. And then on our individual countries, we focus on serving only people in our country instead of looking and taking our businesses on the road. So I think this set of circumstances will begin to force us to begin thinking about this in a way that we've never done before, because I think that's a substantial opportunity to tap into.
Great.
Thank you, Vincent. Alison, there's a question for you from Jody, who's asking, does the informal sector have a greater chance of rebounding than the formal sector?
Well, it depends, because here is why. The informal sector doesn't pay tax. So generally their income is tax-free. The problem with the informal sector is the fact that they're informal. So when governments are giving out some help, they don't know you exist. So it depends on what informal sector you're referring to. If you are part of a business that is registered with the company's office, is paying tax, people know about them. They're the ones that are going to get the help from the government or from any organization that is helping. If we don't see that you are legitimate, because let's be honest, we have lots of informal businesses that are legitimate, but we also have lots of informal businesses that are criminals. So determining who is very important. So in terms of rebounding, the informal sector does feed off the formal. It's just that for whatever barriers they're not in. So my advice, if you're informal, now is the time to get yourself sorted out. Get yourself ready to become formal, because if you don't, you may miss the boat. A lot of banks in Jamaica, as an example, I harass some of them when you're trying to set up. I recently set up my own business and I thought I was known. They wanted a cash flow statement just to open a bank account. Now, that's something I can do very quickly. But if you're in the informal sector and you don't know how to do a cash statement, it can be daunting. We also have the Proceeds of Crime Act. We also have Know Your Client. We have a lot of information that you need to get to the banks. My advice, now is the time to get that done. Because once we get through COVID, is going to be very dicey in terms of speed, in terms of getting, into the net of when we want to go visit Guyana. We're not going to use the informal sector to go to Guyana. You're going to have to be registered, because if you don't have a passport, you can't show up in Guyana. So I think the informal will get punished simply because it feeds off the formal and can't get any incentives and can't get anything, the help the governments or the agencies are going to need to give. So that's my view on that. So if you're informal and you're legal, please come into the net.
Thanks. As I said before, a lot of questions about tourism and diversifying the economies of the Caribbean. And one person asks, Valerie, she says, in the context of business unusual, what is the role of digital tools in getting the tourism sector going and in building out a sustainable strategy? You touched on this a little bit before, Vincent.
Yeah, I mean, let's begin with something that we are all familiar with, and is one of the greatest tools ever created in the history of mankind, is called the immigration card. Everybody comes into our country has to fill out an immigration card and create it with information to us. Now, if we had a digital immigration card, we would be able to do the kind of analyses that will be done in 2 seconds to identify some of our best customers and some of the other ways that we can begin to tap into and begin to communicate with them. So we have, I think, just the beginnings of doing some work that is going to make a substantial difference to how we promote our business and how we approach our business in the future. The idea of beginning to communicate with our customers before they get to our destinations is very easily done digitally. And we talk about community tourism, we talk about diversifying the things that people participate in. But if you can show people these things before they get here and begin to communicate with them in ways that are extraordinary, that is going to be wonderful. When Alison is talking about teaching people how to dance and people about our music, how about letting people know this is what our music sounds like before you get here, and this is how you dance to our music when you get here, and here are some of the places you can go and enjoy that. All of that is sitting, waiting for us to do. When we start talking about some of these restaurants that are now delivering stuff, it's possible for me to live someplace in a particular way and digitally make reservations in advance before I get to the destination and arrange my meals to be delivered to me wherever I am, even if I'm in a marina, even if I'm in another property. So the digital world has such enormous promise for us to begin to expand the extraction of benefits and revenues from tourism. And then the other point that Alison just mentioned about the informal and informal society. The informal sector feeds off the formal sector. So when they begin to grow the formal sector, we begin to extract a lot more benefits, a lot more distribution of income for people who are participating in some of the more formal sectors. So the digital opportunities in the tourism sector, I can go on and on about it. We have just begun to crack open that opportunity in ways that I think many of our young people are already quite familiar with and should be participating.
One issue with the whole digital that concerns me, though, is digital privacy, what companies do with the information they have. It's really important that our governments get on and get some digital rules in place, because, it is very useful and it's also very dangerous. We tend to take way too long to get legislation passed, and it will pass us by if we don't get on that. In particular, if you're in the informal sector, there's a reason you're informal. You're also afraid of bureaucracy. You're afraid of all kinds of madness. I think some of the things that we need to do are just burdens to not just big businesses, but to the informal. So from a tourism perspective, if you're a fisherman and you want to get online and you want to get digital and you want to, some of the loopholes to just open a bank account. Yes, we hear about terrorism. Yes, but I think globally we need to start to get ourselves in a place in the Caribbean. Some of these things are not as onerous, and importantly, we take the roadblocks out of the way and make our digital safer, or you have repercussions if somebody steals your data and does something about it.
I'm going to give a plug for a company that we are doing some work with. It's called incountry.com. Go take a look at it. What they do is make sure that whatever the digital rules are, including the GDPR rules, are all being met and all being properly advanced, because the stuff becomes so sophisticated nowadays. It's very important you get a professional to make sure that the privacy issues are being resolved, and people are opting in when they want to receive something from you, and you are not using your information, as far as I'm concerned, illegally. So you're entirely right.
So there are many questions, and I'd like to get to them. Well, at least one on the issue of intra-regional air travel, and it's, you know, it being an impediment to internal tourism within the Caribbean region. And it says, our anonymous attendee is asking, we've spoken about the viability of interregional travel for years, but interregional travel remains expensive via air. What do governments urgently need to do in light of the crisis to get this going? What can they do?
Well, nobody likes my answer, but it's the answer I've had for the past 20 years. One of the problems that we have in this region is that if you look at the total cost of travel for short distances within the region, it is outrageously high. The reason it's outrageously high is because of the taxes and fees that are put on top of what the airfare is from the airline. When you have high fixed taxes and high fixed taxes at both ends of your travel and a relatively modest airfare in between, we suddenly come out with prices that are outrageously high. My biggest piece of evidence is that in almost every single case, countries earn far more money after the customer lands in terms of taxes and benefits than they ever receive on the front end. And if they were reducing the cost of travel within the region, you suddenly find a lot more business travel, a lot more tourist travel, and a lot higher occupancies, therefore a lot more employment, therefore more tax collection by the government. So I am convinced that the fastest way for us to get our regional carriers profitable and much more expansive is to begin to look at the cost of taxes that we charge within this region, fixed taxes. And by the way, I am not anti-tax, but the problem is if somebody is spending $100 airfare and you're putting a $150 tax on top of it, that's one thing. If somebody is spending $1,000 airfare coming from Europe to the Caribbean, you put a $150 tax on it, it's no big deal. So distance and proximity matters. And if you want to stimulate it, I hope that's one of the ways we can begin to do it. And by the way, not just me, go and take a look at an IATA study, go and take a look at a Caribbean Development Bank study, they come exactly the same conclusion.
I also think that we compete too much as Caribbean territories. And, you know, the surest way to go from being a billionaire to a millionaire is to own an airline, I hear. So I think one of the things that if we really are serious about moving around CARICOM, moving around our territories, we need to truly get all the governments working together to see how best, whether it's tax, whether it's subsidizing, whether it is coming and running an efficient airline that doesn't just cater to the needs of your country, but the needs of the region. So I think it would take, I think it would be something CARICOM should look at, and make sure that we have it, whether it's a smaller plane. And we also need to make sure our citizens want to take it, because money is one thing, but if I'm not interested in going to Guyana, we could have an airline all we want. It goes hand in hand. We need more tourist-led ads to the Caribbean. So I want to see some beautiful waterfalls from Guyana coming into my airspace, coming into my digital, where I want to get and go to Guyana, where the ads are not just for North America and some cold place. For me to look to say, I don't have that waterfall in Jamaica. I don't have that waterfall in my backyard. The diversity and the beauty that is Guyana, I would want to see it. So we need to also build internally to be able to get a proper airline. We should also look at boats. I mean, you know how beautiful it would be to get some kind of ferry system, some kind of boat. I think we need to start to look outside of the box and not just look at airlines. We can look at other ways as well. But I think it has to be a joint up approach. It can't be just Jamaica or just Trinidad, or we need the entire Caribbean and Guyana and Suriname and Belize. We all need to sit down and say, what do we really need our Caribbean people to see from our countries and how we're going to do it? We need our governments to wake up and listen to what we say, but we need our Caribbean people to want it.
Well, I can tell you, in defense of the governments, somehow we found ourselves in a situation where, I steal somebody else's phrase, that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. When we had the Gulf War in the early 1990s, the governments came together and promoted the Caribbean as a group.
Mhm.
After 9/11, the governments came together and promoted the Caribbean as a group. Don't believe me? Go and look at the share of Caribbean business that happens as a direct result of that. Suddenly, we found ourselves getting a lot more business. And so, once again, we should be in the business of making sure that we are working and promoting the region as a group, because that seems to be the biggest possible payoff that we can ever find. And I suspect, and that's part of the reason why we are talking about, in terms of developing a COVID-free Caribbean, that we hope we get protocols put in place that we are doing it as a group rather than competing with a confusion and profusion of protocols. So that's really where we are.
Thank you so much, guys. And we're going to have to wrap up soon, but I just want to ask a final question to all three of you. And it has to do with seeking the interests of employees at this time. If you're running a business in the Caribbean, it means that you're also an employer. And, you know, many employers are finding it hard to balance fiscal sustainability in this crisis with retaining their staff that have been with them for a long time, that they've trained, that they've empowered, that they've resourced. And so I just wanted to get your advice, your words of advice to business owners, small, medium, and large, who are finding it hard to balance that professional and financial interest with, you know, keeping people employed and retaining the staff that they value highly. So Zulfikar, I'd like to start with you on that point, if that's okay.
Sure, thank you, Golda. You know, I would really like to reach out to all businesses out there. If it is possible for you not to lay off staff, please don't do it. If it's possible for you to maybe even cut their salaries in half, then please do so. Now is not the time where we can afford to have families without food on their table. Now is not the time at all. And I know that it is a very challenging environment that we are in. That is why, like I said earlier, this needs a comprehensive, broad approach. Governments and all stakeholders have to be involved. And I do believe that if government can provide those incentives for businesses to keep their staff, even if they cannot pay them the amount that they're accustomed to, but at least have them on the payroll so that food could be on the table until we sort out this social distancing and COVID and getting back our economies on track and getting business on track. If those things can be done, we must do so as businesses, as people, as a region. And government can help, as I said before. We could maybe overlook for a short period of time NIS contributions, National Insurance Scheme contributions that businesses have to make on behalf of their employees. That can go now directly to paying employees' salaries. Government could subsidize, put a moratorium on loans, on credit to these to small businesses as well. There are many things that we could do, but we must have at the back of our head that we should not, if we can avoid it, send anyone at home at this point in time. There are many things we can do, and we need to work together to do them.
Thank you so much. Vincent?
Well, I mean, I generally agree with everything that I'm sure Zulfikar has just said in terms of focusing on making sure that at this time that there is a continuing connection between employer and employee for as long as we possibly can. Because as soon as you break that relationship and you got to go start up all over again, you're going to be in deep when you can finish the sentence. So it is very important for us to try and extend that as far as we possibly can, even if it requires some kind of reduction in the amount you're getting individually, but to keep that relationship in place so that when we are ready to go again, we'll be in far, far better circumstances. And I have always been somebody who will agree to having, as far as we can, a kind of a reduction for everybody so that we retain everybody, as opposed to getting rid of some people under these circumstances and then having to go scramble and try to find them again. So you only deepen the haves and the have-nots. So I think it's very important from a sociological, economic point of view that we try to retain as many of our employees as long as we possibly can and have them connected still with the institution or organization with which they began.
Thank you, Vincent.
I totally agree. Because without people, we're going to have major issues right around. And it's so difficult to train and get people up the curve, particularly if you get them straight out of university. So my advice would be first, before you're going to let go, look at vacation time. See if you can extend the vacation time. So we all, every day we work, we're entitled to vacation. So before, and if you let them go, you're going to have to pay for it. Also, I would focus on medical. Now is not the time for your employees to be without medical care. So perhaps sit down and look again, cash management. Go online to Junior Achievement, look at, the Institute of Chartered Accountants, or ICAC, ICAJ, all of your various institutes, and ACCA and CPA Canada. They all have these programs, some free, that give you some cash management tools. Look to see who is very important, who, when you're out of COVID, you cannot do without. Also have a conversation. Don't just get rid of people. Have a discussion as to how can we do this? How are we best? Perhaps have a discussion with the insurance companies, because maybe you can keep them on for medical purposes, even if you have to let them go because you keep them maybe a day or two. So you share the pain, because you don't want to be sick right now and people worry about their children in medical care while this is happening. So I think looking very closely at vacation and delaying that, looking very carefully at your cash management, and realizing that perhaps you need to take a pay cut to be able to keep some staff. Sometimes as managers or as business people, we think of ourselves last. But if you're looking to say, maybe I could take home less. And the other issue too, it's not just your employees. If you can pay your mortgage, if you can pay your rent, do so. Because if all of us are straining, if you can pay your tax, do so. Because right now, if you have the ability to pay and you don't, the ripple effect will be a problem. So even the employees that are working, they should pay where they can while managing their cash. That's my advice with regards to the small businesses.
Thank you so much to all of you for taking time to be with us today and to share your expertise and your advice and your options for businesses in the region. We're going to continue doing this. Just next week, we have another webinar planned for you, the Caribbean and coronavirus, and we're going to be talking about family violence, which tends to spike violence, intimate partner violence, child abuse, elder abuse, tends to spike in times of crisis and quarantine, and we're going to be talking about that issue for the region. That's next week, Wednesday. That's the 29th at exactly noon EDT. So we hope that you will register for that webinar starting tomorrow, and we'll also be sending you some resources based on the things that we talked about today. I mentioned before our Caribbean Quarterly Bulletin, which is specifically focused on the impact of COVID-19 on the region, economic impact. We're going to be sharing some reports with you, as well as our blog page, so that you can keep updated, subscribe, and join this conversation and continue to talk with us. A lot going on in our chat. Thank you so much for being so engaged in this session, and we hope to see you for the next one. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Bye.
Stay safe.